We're going to continue on with these next two stories about Mary and Martha. And the first of these is the death of Lazarus. So if you would, open your Bible to John. We're going to go to the Gospel of John now for these next couple of stories. And we're going to look at first at the death of Jesus, then we will look at the anointing of Jesus by Mary. I like to look at this story of the death of Lazarus as if it's a movie and there are certain scenes to look at in the movie, or play, and there's certain scenes in this play. So we're going to look at Act 1, the scene unfolds. Act 2 is going to be Martha. Act 3 is going to be Mary. And Act 4 is going to be Jesus. And that's how we will sort of break down looking at the story of the death of Lazarus. Let me read it to you. And Act 1, the scene unfolds, begins in verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, and the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sister sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you loved is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now we're going to skip down to verse 17, and we'll look at Act 2 in verse 17. When Jesus arrived, he found, and this has to do with Martha. Okay, Act 2 is Martha. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Everyone who believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Now let's move on to Act 3, beginning in verse 28. When she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not come to the village, but was still at a place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him. She knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now we will move on to scene 4, or Act 4 rather, Jesus. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. There was a cave and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Just a little footnote here. And stop the story. Pause story, footnote. Okay. There was a preacher that I would listen to growing up. primarily through albums that he had done, old vinyl albums that he had done. His name's Marshall Keeble. And Marshall Keeble was an African-American preacher in the traditional Church of Christ. And he would tell these stories about the gospel that I just never heard anyone tell the stories like him. And so I loved it when he would tell the story of the raising of Lazarus, because every time he would get to this point right here, and he would say, you know, Jesus, he said, Lazarus, come out. And it's a good thing he mentioned by name, because if he had said, just come out, the whole cemetery would have come back from the dead. Yeah, I laugh every time I think about him saying that. It was so awesome. I wish I could just play it for you, because the way he said it was fantastic. But he does mention Lazarus by name. Lazarus, you come out. The rest of you, stay where you are. And then it says, the dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to him, leave him, or loose him rather, and let him go. So let's talk about this a little bit. Act 1, just setting up the scene a little bit, because this story is very, very rich in detail. And so it's important to pay attention to the details. If you're studying the Bible on your own, pay attention to the details that you see in the story, because many times it's those details that bring these little facts that are just really inspiring. And we've seen a number of those as we've gone through these stories with Jesus and the women of the Gospels. But we see here that, you know, again, it's in Bethany, which was just above Jerusalem. I've been there a number of times. In fact, we used to go there on Shabbat, on Saturday. We would go, when we lived in Jerusalem, our whole church would go there to the Four Homes of Mercy, which was the Palestinian hospital. And we would just serve the people there on a Saturday. We ended up painting murals on the wall and that sort of thing. So Bethany is a place that's very familiar to us. It's in the West Bank. It's just beyond the border in Israel. You have to cross the barrier there to go there. But in the first century, it was a village on the top of the Mount of Olives, just behind the Mount of Olives, and just above Jerusalem, a very quick walk up the hill into Bethany, where Jesus would stay in the home of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. You know, Simon the leper was there. It's believed that it was also that there was a leper colony there in Bethany. And so it wasn't the most popular place for a Jewish rabbi to go because there was a leper colony there. But again, Jesus didn't care about those type of social norms and conventions or barriers. He would just, he disregarded them. Yeah. And so he would go there. For Jesus was not going to become unclean by a leper. He was going to help a leper become clean. Yeah. And that was his thought, is how can I help? What can I do here to serve? And so he would go to those places where many rabbis, and especially Pharisees, would have a hard time going. But Jesus would go there. And he goes here, and we don't know, but it seems that Martha and Mary are not married. And if that were the case of them not being married, then to lose their brother would put them in a very precarious position, because it's a totally patriarchal society at that time. And so the head of the house was the man. And even though in these stories, and you notice even this story, it's Mary that acts, Martha rather, that acts first. She seems to be the one that's providing leadership in this household. Lazarus is just kind of there, and he's sitting, or he's dead, you know? And so he's not really an active part of this story. He's very passive, especially when he's dead. He's a very passive part in this story. But still, in that society, to lose your brother puts you in a different social class altogether. Because now you're just women fending on your own. And there's not a man there, which... So for them, this would have been a really, really big deal. And when they send the word out to Jesus, hey, the one you love is ill, that's a really big deal to them. But then also coming and honoring somebody at the funeral was something that was a very big deal culturally in that day and time. And for Jesus not to come back and to heal Lazarus when they know that Jesus had the power to do that, and also Jesus not to come back for the funeral itself. Lazarus is already in the tomb by this point. Funerals happen very quickly, usually within the day, and still in the Middle East happen within the day when a person dies. That to them again is like, Jesus, where are you? Why haven't you come back? And so, but their plea at this point isn't responded to in the way that they would hope that it would be responded to. And I think it's important for us there just to take a note from that, and that is that every request that we give to Jesus is not going to be met with the answer of yes. But Jesus will work through the details anyway. And that's what happens here. He does not give them a yes answer. He doesn't just jump in a chariot and come right back. In fact, he lets the scene play out. And he lets it play out to the greater glory of God, which they can't see. You know, that's stuff going on behind the curtain that they cannot glimpse. But Jesus knows all of that. And so when we get the no answer, or the no, or the not yet, or the not yes answer, we still have to trust. And that's a sub point of what we see going on a little bit in the backstory here. I read a book a number of years ago, way back when I was in seminary, a book that I loved by Christoph Barth, and it's called God With Us. And you recognize God with us as Emmanuel, Jesus, God with us. But this is an Old Testament book. It was an Old Testament book about God being Emmanuel for the people of Israel. God was present with them. But the thing that I appreciated about the book the most is not only did he talk about all the times that God was present with his people, like on Mount Sinai, for example, he also talked about all the times that God was absent for his people. Like when Elijah cries out, you know, God, where are you? He's in a cave. God, where are you? He has his greatest victory up on Mount Carmel, and then he runs and hides in a cave. And, you know, God, where are you? And God's like, I'm here. I've always been here. Yeah. There are many more prophets than you understand and know about. God, and here, the thing that I learned from Christoph Barth in looking at that is, sometimes we think that God is absent, but God is always present. And he writes this, and I thought this was beautiful. God is present in his absence. I know, that's deep, right? It was deep when I read it probably 40, 50 years ago. And it's still deep today for me. Because I've been in those moments where I've been like, God, where are you? And I've cried the Psalms, how long, O Lord? How long? Wondering, God, where is your presence right now? But then what I've tried to see is, even as I was crying those tears, I always tried to see God's presence in the absence. And I think that's what happens with Mary and Martha here. Jesus appears to be absent, but he's actually present in the absence, and he's going to use it for God's greater glory. Okay? That's deep, right? Oh, that is so deep. And it's not my thought, so I'm not taking credit for the deepness. I just happened upon this book that really helped me years and years ago. So we're going to move to Acts 2 now. That was Act 1. Now let's move to Act 2, and we're going to talk about Martha a little bit. And so I'm going to call my wife back up, and she will share right now. Yes, give it up for Leigh.
Okay, I love this chapter in the Gospels. This may be one of my favorite chapters in the Gospel because of what happens with Jesus and these women. And through the years, I've learned so much about struggling with God in this chapter. There are two important lessons for me from this chapter that have helped me so much over and over again that Jesus teaches And I believe the first one is, he teaches, especially in verses 4 through 6 of this chapter, he teaches that it's about God getting the glory and people seeing Jesus through what's going on. And the second one is that we have to trust God's timing. And the Bible clearly states that Jesus loved this family, yet he didn't answer them right away. He didn't heal. He actually stayed where he was. Silence. That's all they heard. And I love what Steve was saying about him being present in the silence, knowing that God is always working and he's always listening, even when it seems like he's silent. And I've learned through the years that Jesus is more interested in getting me ready to be with him in heaven than for making everything better here so that I want to stay longer. You know, God is not ignoring you. He just loves you too much to answer your prayer at any other time than the right time. I saw this quote. Now, I have my own set of quotes. Steve quotes all these books. I quote Facebook, okay? Whenever someone puts something great on Facebook, I'm like, oh, I like that. And that's honestly where I get a lot of my sources from. And not that that's always good, but anyway. But I love that quote, that he answers, he loves us too much. I think Lisa Turkis said that. He just loves you too much to answer your prayer at any other time than just the right time. I love how verses 20 through 24, Martha goes out to meet him. I love that Martha felt like she could go to him. She did this in her house. She did this in the worst time of her life. She was so real. She just came out with it. Even when she was going through so much, she was grieving, she was disappointed, she was hurting on so many levels. It would have been so easy for her just to shut down. But she knew Jesus loved them. In fact, she'd sent the word, you know, the one you love is sick. She knew they were loved. The text says that he loved them. But where was he when she really needed him? His kind of love didn't always feel like love. And I love what she says when she gets to him. You know, if you had been here, the what if things in our lives. Boy, don't we have a lot of them. I do. The silent times, the not getting the answer times can be some of the hardest times in my life. But she doesn't stop with that statement. She works herself through it. She says, but I know that even now, you can fix this. You are who you say you are. I see her struggling to be faithful. And to me, that's what it's all about, the struggle. The struggle to be faithful, not having perfect faith all the time, but it's a struggle. And I think she shows tremendous faith here by the things that she says. Later on, verses 38 through 40, it talks about how moved Jesus is. I think sometimes we don't think about how Jesus hurts too. I think it cost Jesus dearly to stay and not rescue them from this pain because he loved them. I think he stayed at a personal cost to himself. Later on it says that he wept. He loved them knowing that it would hurt them that he stayed, that they would not understand why he stayed. But Jesus cared more about God getting the glory than them getting immediate relief from their heartbreak. And I asked myself, you know, it's no different for me today. The same for me today. It's no different. He cares more about God getting the glory in my life than necessarily fixing what I want him to fix. Martha says, but Lord, I love it later on, this, you know, with the whole odor thing. This is a whole class in itself. You know, he says, remove the stone, but Lord, it stinks, you know. She's so practical. She's also so negative and faithless. She's so controlling. Her own nature came creeping back in. She had a great moment. Because back in verse 27, it said, this is actually the first and only recorded confession from a woman that he was the Son of God. This was huge. This was equal to what Peter said in Matthew chapter 16. And I love that it was her, because this Martha, who struggled to control everything, who was distracted, who was worried, who was upset, just like us, she struggled to make Jesus Lord. But she got it. But she had that mountaintop experience and that statement, and then the practicality, the hard times, sometimes bring out our own nature, don't they? But Lord, it was really hard to believe this. And I love what Jesus says in verse 40. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you'd see the glory of God? I love that over and over, Jesus corrected Martha, and she took it. You know, I have to ask myself the same thing sometimes. How many times does God have to tell me the same thing over and over? Leigh, did I not tell you? Making him my true Lord when I'm hurt and afraid and when it makes no sense, that's when it matters the most. You know, again, for me, my vulnerable spot is with my family. And, you know, later on, you know, we have a son, and when he was in his teens, he went through a really, really rough time also. It was terrifying. And I cannot tell you, as a mom, what a failure I felt to have both kids struggling so much. We were in the ministry, and our family life was falling apart. We were a hot mess. I would go to church. I'd have to take everything in me just to go to church. And I would sit there and cry the whole time. Of course, Steve was up there trying to preach and trying to help. He was hurting. I was sitting there crying. Our kids were doing who knows what. It was just rough. And I remember one day, I was talking to Sam Powell, and I was like, you know, I'm done. I just don't think I can get through this. I don't think I can do this. And there's so much that goes into this that I don't have time to tell. And if you want to know it somewhere, I'd be glad to share it with you. It's all out there. But I remember telling him this, and he went, "Sister, you need to show us how to struggle." That was not what I wanted to hear. I said, "I don't want to be that person." And he talked me through it, but I'll never forget that. And over through the years, when it hasn't been what I expected it to be or wanted to hear, I have to go back to the Bible and say, okay, did he not tell me? Did he not tell me? What did he tell me? I don't know. What did he tell me? Oh, I like it. This struggle to go to the Bible and make him Lord over and over and over and over and over. And I struggle because, and I love how Deb and Tom put it in a workshop recently, because I love my kids so much. And she said, that's not the problem. The problem is we have to love God more. And I was like, yeah, that's it. And someone once said one time to never put a period where God puts a comma. And that's how I try to look at the different things in life that come up. There's an interruption there. Ooh, comma. Okay, but it's not done yet. We have no idea what God's doing behind the scenes. We have to choose to love him over and over and make him Lord. I love it just down in chapter 12 of John, verse 1, and Steve will get into this, verse 22. It says that they were at dinner again, and it says that this time Martha served. And I think that's really important, that it just says Martha served. Now, Mary was there with her amazing heart. Martha was in the background. She was doing the same things that needed to be done, but with a different heart. This time, no attitude was mentioned. It was not about her anymore. She learned from her struggles. Her perspective had changed her heart. It was about others now and not her. I believe Martha over and over made decisions to make him Lord, and she chose to make it about God's way, not her way. She learned to do what needed to be done Jesus' way and not having to control everything. I love that she knew who to go to. She didn't always go with the right heart. She actually went most of the time thinking she was right. But Jesus met her where she was at. And he taught her, and he loved her enough to tell her what she needed to hear. For me, I have to make sure I'm going to Jesus. He can handle my issues, my fears, my doubts, my emotions. I have to be willing to look at what he says and change and ask myself, is he really going to be Lord of this choice that I need to make right now? Maybe there's something today God's saying to you. It's the same thing. You keep hitting that wall. Did I not tell you? What is it for you? You know, the challenges and times keep on coming, don't they? And for us, they keep on coming. Even years later, we learned, both of our kids, Chelsea shared yesterday about her diagnosis that was different. Then later on with our son, he had a diagnosis a couple of years ago that was different than what we had tried to help him with growing up. Both of them misdiagnosed. And boy, did I struggle each time, feeling like a failure as a mom. Oh, I should have figured this out. I should have taken him to this kind of, or this or that. And you know how you go down that road of regret and feeling like such a failure. But you know what? I finally worked through that, you know what? God is bigger than all that. It's about God's timing and not mine. God reveals things when he's ready to reveal things. The things I've learned during these hard years, irreplaceable.
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned so much about is to not judge, because we don't know what someone's really going through. I'm a work in progress, we all are, but by obeying and deciding to make Jesus Lord of all of our choices, one by one it changes us. I read this illustration years ago that it helps me. I think about it a lot, and it was about this these two brothers back in the 1800s, and they went around stealing sheep, and they lived in this little community, and they hardly anyone in the community had something stolen by these brothers. Well, they were finally caught, and the town decided they were going to really shame them. And so, how can we teach these guys a lesson? So they decided to brand the letters ST on the brothers' foreheads that stand for sheep thief. So they branded this on these brothers' foreheads, and one of the brothers was so ashamed that he ran away, and they never saw him again. The other brother decided to stay, and he decided to make amends to the people that he had stolen from, to the people that he'd hurt. So choice by choice, day by day, week by week, month by month, year after year, he would give, he would serve. When someone needed something, he was the first one there. He'd walk through the town, and people would say things about it. Oh, there's that sheep thief. He just kept going. He just kept doing what was right, choice by choice. He lived to be an old man. And one day, he was in this cafe, having some coffee, and this stranger came into town to get some coffee. And he looked over there, and the stranger looked at this old man. He had this brand ST on his forehead. And the cafe owner said, he asked the cafe owner, he said, "What is that? Why does that guy have that mark on his head?" And the cafe owner thought about it. He said, "Wow, something happened so long ago. I don't even really remember what it was. Oh, but you know what? It has to stand for saint." And I love that. Choice by choice, we get to be like Jesus. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you, Leigh. Thanks for sharing your heart and all your thoughts on this. And it's obvious that you've spent much time in the scripture learning from Martha. I really appreciate you sharing everything you've learned from her. That's fantastic. Let's turn to Act 3 now. And so we've looked at Act 2 with Martha. In Act 3, you have Mary. The only thing I really want to say here in Act 3 is that you see for the second time, Mary is at the feet of Jesus. And it says, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And so the first time, obviously, was the time where she's at the feet of Jesus learning. Now she falls at his feet and in a sense of honoring him. And then we'll see again, she will anoint his feet in the next story. And then in Act 4, we see Jesus coming into the story here. And it's amazing because, you see Jesus, you see his compassion for the sisters. And this is the text where it says that Jesus wept. Jesus cried. And he cried because he saw how much that they were hurting. And even though he was going to make things better, he still suffered with them through that moment of them suffering, which he does with all of us as well. And then also you see the power of Jesus coming through here, that Jesus shows that he has the power to make things right. And in the end, in this story, he raises Lazarus from the dead and does make things right. And so you get to see that great interaction with Jesus and Mary and Martha, and how he works there in the end. In a book entitled The Women's Commentary on the Bible, it says this: Jesus' conversations with Mary and Martha transformed this story from a miracle story about the raising of Lazarus into a story of the fullness of new life that is possible to all who believe in Jesus. For John, the initiative of these women in sending for Jesus, their bold and robust faith, the grief and pain that they bring to Jesus, their willingness to engage Jesus in conversation about life and death and faith, and their unfaltering love for Jesus are marks of discipleship. And so certainly they were growing and changing through all of this, but they were also showing their discipleship in their relationship with Jesus and their conversation with Jesus. So let's move on now, and we will look at this anointing of Jesus by Mary in Bethany during the last week of Jesus' life. It is found in John chapter 12. Yesterday I spent quite a bit of time delineating why I believe that there are 3 anointings in the Gospels. And I think that this is one of those 3. I won't go back through all of the reasons why I feel that. I think I made a good case for that yesterday. But I think this case should be treated as a story on its own, separate from the ones found in Mark and Matthew especially, and definitely from the one in Luke chapter 7 with the sinful woman. So we're going to look at this one on its own as Mary anointing Jesus for burial. And it's in John 12, verse 1, so we're just continuing on from John chapter 11. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany. This is 6 days versus 2 days before the Passover, which is the one that's found in Matthew and Mark. The home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his 12, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that it might keep it for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." So it seems that they're coming together in a celebration for Lazarus, who was just raised. And so they're coming together. They're having another dinner for him. As Leigh mentioned, Martha is serving. But Mary is taking this opportunity to honor Jesus. And once again, you have Lazarus as a passive bystander in these stories. He's not an active agent, really, in any of these stories. Unless you could call dying being an active agent. Probably not. But these stories really are stories of, they're stories about these 2 sisters, more than about the whole family. So we just need to acknowledge that and that the gospel writers are putting this in there and showing us about these women and their relationship with Jesus. And there's a great amount to learn from them. So Mary is serving. The word is the same one that was used before, this word for diakonos, this word of servant. And you can also translate it as minister. You can translate it deacon, but it's a servant ministry. It's a servant leadership that Martha is demonstrating here. And it just shows again that hospitality was important, what she was doing in the earlier story. It's not that it wasn't important, it was. And she continues it even after she is told by Jesus, you know, Martha, Martha, attend to the more important thing here. She continues to serve because serving is important, but it has to fall underneath this umbrella of lordship. And it seems that through the resurrection of Jesus, she has a better understanding of that, and as Leigh mentioned, a better attitude toward that. So much of what we do in life is about our attitude, and attitude is incredibly important. And the motivation behind what we're doing is very important. It's not only about the extrinsic things in life, but it's about the intrinsic things in life that we need to consider and that are really important. So you see Mary's devotion to Jesus here. And let me just make a few very quick points about Mary and what's happening in this story that's a little different from the other two anointings that we've looked at. First we see, this isn't different, but there are points to be made. First we see it's a generous gift. A pound of costly perfume, pure nard, a really extravagant, generous gift. Again, the Women's Bible Commentary says, the anointing is an act of pure extravagance, underscored by the comment that the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Mary has anointed Jesus so lavishly that all present can participate in it. This is the second time a scent has been connected with this family. You know, the earlier time, the scent of Lazarus in the tomb. So what a contrast between Lazarus and he stinks to now Mary with this beautiful smell of perfume all over the house. It goes on and it says in 1139, Martha was worried about the odor of Lazarus' rotting corpse. Here, however, the odor is the marvelous fragrance of nard. The odor of death has been replaced by the odor emanating from Mary's extravagant love. That's a beautiful sentence right there. The odor of death has been replaced by the odor of extravagant love. So that's the first thing that we see. Second thing is we see her wipe her feet, the feet of Jesus, with her hair. And that was talked about yesterday, how uncommon that would have been, but a show of intimacy toward Jesus. And then the third thing is that the whole house is filled with the fragrance of this perfume. And so her gift isn't just bestowed on Jesus, but what she gives to Jesus, others benefit from, which is a great reminder to us in life that whatever we do for Jesus, it's to the benefit of everyone. And everyone benefits from the choices that we make and the decision that we make to follow Jesus and to serve him. The fourth is that undue criticism is heaped upon her, this time by Judas. And I think the thing to underscore there is that happens in life. You could you can be doing good things and still be criticized for it. But don't turn away from doing good things. I mean, you try to do your best, you try to give your best, and there are still critical people around you. And in this case, it's one of the apostles that was critical of her, critical of her gift. And he's so wrong in doing so. And then John shows us in the text the real motivation behind why Judas is saying that. He just wants more money to steal from the treasury. But you go ahead and you give the gift anyway. And you do what you're supposed to be doing anyway, regardless of the criticism. And Mary does that. She gives, the criticism comes her way, but you don't stop giving because of the criticism that you might face. And then the fifth thing is that Jesus does come to her defense, which is great. Now, here's the thing I want to underscore. It doesn't mean that Jesus is always going to come to your defense every time you're criticized. You might just have to live with facing some criticism because of the choices that you're making. And I know a lot of you have done that. A lot of you over the years you have just lived the life of a disciple, and some people have, and maybe even close people, maybe family members, have not really appreciated the decision that you've made. But you're doing it for Jesus, and in the end, Jesus will defend you. In the end, you will get that defense from Jesus, but not necessarily immediately like it happens here. With her, he says, leave her alone. And she brought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor, but not always me. So she doesn't try to defend herself. Instead, Jesus comes to her defense. So let me close out with just a little line here from Rachel Held Evans. It says, in a culture in which a woman's touch was often forbidden, Mary dares to cradle the feet of Jesus in her hands and spread the oil across his ankles and toes with the ends of her hair. Rather than measuring out a small amount of oil, Mary breaks the jar, lets it all pour out. She's all in, fully committed, sparing no expense. The oil she may have been reserving it for her own burial or the burial of a loved one. It has been poured out generously without thought of the future. The humility of this action foreshadows the foot washing that is later to come. Later, Jesus would imitate Mary by washing the feet of the 12, telling them to do the same. I think that's an interesting point that she makes there about the foot washing that Jesus is going to do later. We have such great examples in this story through Mary and Martha that we need to reflect on in our own lives and learn from them. So hopefully you'll go back and you'll ponder these stories and see even greater insight as you spend time with these women and look at them in their relationship with Jesus. Amen. Let's take a short